Okay. This evening, Lily Carlson is here to make a presentation, and Lily is an LA City environmental specialist who leads the LA Sanitation and Environment's Environment's Biodiversity and Healthy Soils program. This evening, she will present on the works of her department. So, Lily, you can unmute yourself and share your screen.
Great. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I do.
All right, great. Well, I'll go ahead and get started then. Thank you for the introduction. I'm very excited to be here and to share my work and what we think about when it comes to native plants and the work that we do. As Snowdy mentioned, my name is Lily Carlson. I'm an environmental specialist in LA Sanitation and Environment, or LASAN, in the city of Los Angeles, and I lead our biodiversity program. So jumping right in. So just a brief outline of the presentation I'm going to give. First, I'm going to talk about generally biodiversity within Los Angeles. So how we approach and think about biodiversity, what we've measured when it comes to biodiversity recently, things like that. Then I'll give an introduction to LASAN and the kind of work that we do, especially as it relates to biodiversity. I'll then talk about the structure of our program, so how we go about doing the work that we do, what strategies we employ in order to make progress on our goals. Then I'll talk about key work, so things that we're working on right now in terms of biodiversity and native plants. And then next steps, just generally what our vision for the biodiversity program is in the future. So jumping right into biodiversity, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with what biodiversity is, but the working definition that we have is the diversity in species and nature that sustains Angelinos. And it is so crucial because without biodiversity, we ultimately would go extinct. And this is because of things called ecosystem services. These are various benefits that are provided to us humans for free as a result of biodiversity, ecosystems, nature. The diagram on the right just showcases some of those ecosystem services. There's a lot. There's more than this. There's so many different things that nature, including native plants, does for us. And really, without biodiversity, we will have no air to breathe. You know, the plants create the oxygen that we breathe, but also they help clean and filter the air. Biodiversity is such a crucial component of maintaining air quality on top of the oxygen that we get from plants. Similarly, we wouldn't have any water to drink. Biodiversity and native plants are so deeply intertwined with the water cycle and filtering and cleaning water to make sure that we have water available. We also wouldn't have any crops to grow, both in terms of the pollinators that help, pollinate our crops, but as well as the soil that supports the crops that grow our food. We also wouldn't have an inhabitable climate. This is something that we think about a lot, is thinking about how biodiversity intersects with climate and climate change and that kind of work. There's things like sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere and storing in biomass, as well as helping mitigate the effects of climate change. For example, regulating extreme temperatures with things like trees. And then also, nature is just such a crucial component of cultural, recreational, and spiritual fulfillment, which I'm sure all of you really empathize with there. Biodiversity, native plants, these things are really essential to our livelihoods, not only in physically surviving, but also finding satisfaction in our lives as well. And really, plants are the foundations of ecosystems, and without them, no biodiversity would exist. So having healthy native plants within LA is really a priority for us. More specifically, diving in on biodiversity within Los Angeles, the current situation of it. This is something you some of you might already know as well. We are in a biodiversity hotspot, the California Floristic Province, which you can see on the map to the right. It spans a large section of California, a little into Oregon, and a little into Mexico. But if you notice down here, Los Angeles is within this hotspot. And what defines a hotspot? This means that there's a high level of endemic plant species. Endemic meaning that these species are only found here and nowhere else on the planet. And so LA has a really rich amount of native plant species that are found nowhere else. And this gives rise to high levels of biodiversity overall. Since I mentioned previously, these native plants are really the supporting foundation for the rest of ecosystems. The other component of biodiversity hotspots too is not just that we have incredible biodiversity, but also this biodiversity is threatened. Los Angeles is a very urban area, and with that comes a lot of threats to biodiversity, like climate change, pollution, land use change. So when we get rid of natural areas for more development, for example, the spread of invasive species, which threatens to outcompete and get rid of our native plants, as well as spread other threats like wildfire, for example, which we've seen very recently as a very significant threat. So really making sure that we take steps now to protect the high level of native plant diversity and other biodiversity that we have in the city right now is so essential and is something that we're working on. Another thing about Los Angeles, and this is partially why we have so many incredible species and incredible biodiversity, is because we are very environmentally diverse. We have so many different ecosystems and native plants found within just the city. For example, we have dunes. We have a large intact section of dunes, although we're trying to still work on it to protect and enhance it near LAX. We have wetlands, for example, Bional wetlands, chaparral and coastal sage scrub, which you can find in areas like the Santa Monica Mountains, plains, which aren't found in large intact areas anymore, where you would expect them to be. That's frequently where we see a lot of urbanization, but it's still an ecosystem that we have here in LA, as well as various riparian ecosystems as well. Just as an example, there's definitely more. And this incredible diversity in different environments and ecosystems really drives the diversity in species. And also, as I mentioned previously, because LA is so urbanized, in recent times, LA has become even more environmentally diverse, because not only do we have all of these different ecosystems still in play within the city, also there's more urbanized and less urbanized areas creating these novel ecosystems that are really intricate and take careful consideration in order to properly address. However, with urbanization, this diversity is not always a good thing. For example, we see a lot of spread of ornamental and invasive plants where we would want native plants to be elsewhere as a consequence of urbanization, or the introduction of development that makes it inhospitable for native plants to survive. So it's definitely something that we have to take into consideration when we're evaluating biodiversity and doing biodiversity work. I would now like to introduce a framework called the Ecotope framework. This is a tool that we developed at LASAN in order to try to track all of this diversity in ecosystems across the city. Ecotope is essentially just a land management unit that we use that is based on 3 ecological characteristics. Landform, so thinking about topography like slope and elevation, microclimate, so really what's the local temperature and precipitation found across the city, as well as species presence, so the communities that are typically found within that area. And we did all this mapping and analysis, and we came up with 16 different ecotopes, which are rough approximations of ecological conditions. And again, this allows us to track local trends in biodiversity, just because the city is so big and so diverse in what we see, that using a tool like this really allows us to be more effective with our work. And I have a map on the left here that shows all the ecotopes across the city. There's 16 total. I don't know if I mentioned that already, but they're generally classified into 4 types. Foothills, which you can see with the Verdugo Mountains, the San Gabriel Mountains, and the Santa Susana Hills near the top of our city. Coastal ecotopes, hills, which we really see in the Santa Monicas, and then valleys, which corresponds to a lot of the highly urbanized areas that we see, which makes sense since we want to generally build on flat land. And it's really important also when we're thinking about local trends and biodiversity is that we consider environmental justice. We are very highly urbanized, and that comes with environmental threats and consequences to biodiversity. And the urbanization is not distributed evenly across the city. This results in really significant injustice issues, where a lot of areas across the city are very environmentally disadvantaged. And this means that they both, in terms of proximity to biodiversity, like natural areas and landscape coverage, as well as access to the ecosystem services that the biodiversity provides. So things like temperature regulation in the middle of summer is something that a lot of people in the city don't have access to reliably. And now I'm a map person, so I always love showcasing maps. And so I'll just like to share a few that I think are really telling about the trends when it comes to how biodiversity and nature and native plants are kind of tracked and measured across the city. The map on the left, it shows natural areas in the city. So the green here are natural areas, and then the yellow areas are degraded natural areas. And as you can see, most of our natural areas are largely in the Santa Monica Mountains, as you can see in the center, as well as some in the Verdugo Mountains and the San Gabriel Mountains and the Santa Susana Hills. But you see some ecotopes, for example, the Los Angeles River lower alluvial plain, which corresponds to southern LA, just have no natural areas whatsoever. And the map on the right shows a similar theme, except for this time it shows the area of the natural area. It's really important that a natural area is as well connected and as large as possible, since that gives rise to biodiversity. And as you can see, a lot of the few natural areas that are in some of the more urbanized ecotopes, for example, Sepulveda Basin and the San Fernando Valley alluvial plain, or Elysian Park more in the right part of this map and the Repetto Hills and Terraces. These natural areas are very small and fragmented, which means they don't necessarily offer the same amount of biodiversity benefits and ecosystem services that larger habitats, larger areas of habitat do. So again, just another element of nature being inequitably distributed across the city. And this is kind of a plot that is not a map, but summarizes that information here. And as you can see, some of the results for these ecotopes is really significant. This gray here is in developed non-natural areas. And some of these ecotopes have basically no natural areas whatsoever. For example, the Los Angeles River lower alluvial plain, which I pointed to previously, which corresponds to South LA, has 99.8% non-natural areas. That is huge. All of the people living there have virtually no access to these natural areas and biodiversity. And you can see that as well for a few other ecotopes. And here's two more maps that I'd like to share. Again, I'm a map person and I love sharing off the maps that we've made. The map on the left shows census tracts that aren't within half a mile of a natural area. And the red showcases census tracts that are not. And as you can see, a significant majority of these census tracts do not have access to natural areas. And I think it is really alarming, and it's something that we're working on, is that the majority of Angelenos within the city don't have easy access to natural areas and the biodiversity and the native plants that are found there. And then lastly, the map on the right shows landscape and tree canopy coverage. This just essentially measures for each area what the percentage of the land type is: grasses, shrubs, or trees. And again, it's a similar pattern that you can see once again. There's these really disadvantaged areas across the city that not only don't have access to natural areas and the biodiversity found within these areas, but also don't have access to things like tree canopy coverage to help cool temperatures, clean the air, or even grasses or shrubs for recreational fulfillment or to support any sort of biodiversity whatsoever. So environmental justice is something that we really take in consideration and is something that we're looking to when it comes to prioritizing our work in the future. So now moving into the work that we do, just to give you a brief overview of LASAN. LASAN, we are the lead agency for the city's environmental programs and initiatives. And this is mainly done through three main program areas: clean water, watershed protection, and solid resources. However, there's also other smaller environmental initiatives that don't necessarily fall neatly within one of these three categories hosted within LASAN, including biodiversity. We have a webpage. It's lacitysan.org/biodiversity if you're curious to look at it. I can also type that in the chat at the end if anybody's interested in taking a look. And I am within LASAN's sustainability division. This is still a pretty new division. It was formed at the end of 2023, so we're still pretty new. But we do a variety of sustainability work, such as biodiversity, which I'm presenting on right now, healthy soils, which is the other program that I lead, climate action, tree planting, and environmental justice. And environmental justice is very interdisciplinary and involves a lot of coordination with other people and programs. As I mentioned previously, with biodiversity, there's environmental justice, but there's plenty of environmental justice issues elsewhere. So it really takes a lot of coordination in order to properly address. So a brief origin of the program, if you're wondering, how did LASAN get a biodiversity program? Biodiversity in local government is still very new and exceptional in a lot of regards. So how LASAN's biodiversity program came about was starting in 2017, when the city council approved motion number 150499, which did the following. It directed LASAN to work with other relevant departments to work together and address biodiversity. This resulted in the formation of our interdepartmental team, which I'll get into a bit in a little. And in addition to that, it also directed us to engage with local experts and resources, which is how we ended up creating our Biodiversity Expert Council, which I'll also talk about in a bit. Also to create a biodiversity index in order to measure the status and health of biodiversity within the city, which I'll again talk about later. And then also to do community engagement and outreach with an emphasis on environmental justice, which is something I've already talked about and is an ongoing process for us. So now talking about the program and how we utilize various resources, I'd like to talk about our biodiversity interdepartmental team. Biodiversity is such a huge issue that if it was just LASAN working on this, we would not be able to get much done. Right now, it's just me as the only full-time person on biodiversity. So working with other people and collaborating is really crucial and is something that we're really trying to emphasize and work on and develop. So right now for our biodiversity interdepartmental team, we have 11 departments within our core team. These departments do full reporting on biodiversity goals. This is basically where they create 5 or more biodiversity goals that are measurable and achievable throughout the fiscal year. And then at the end, they'll report back on their progress to us at LASAN, as well as to provide us with their new goals for the next fiscal year. So yeah, we have 11 departments in the interdepartmental team. Some of these might make sense. For example, like city planning, recreation and parks, but we also have a lot of other departments as well. For example, LA Public Library, who's a fantastic partner. They do a lot of work with our community science initiatives, education, community engagement and outreach, that kind of thing. So really collaborating and deepening our work with other departments is something that we've done in the past and we want to continue to emphasize moving forward in the future. Now talking about the expert council that I mentioned. Our expert council contains a variety of experts from all different fields relevant to biodiversity. So you might think of something like ecology as the go-to field, and we definitely have some fantastic ecologists on our expert council. But we also have experts on a variety of other fields as well. For example, education, planning, governance and management, that kind of thing. And it's grown over the years. As I mentioned, this program really started in 2017. And since then, we have dozens of members on our expert council who are great and we value very much. And they help provide feedback and buy-ins and support major actions that we undertake. For example, the creation and publication of reports on the Biodiversity Index, which I'll talk about in a bit. But they're ultimately on a volunteer basis. They have their own jobs to prioritize. So it's really important that we're strategic with how we deploy the expert council to make sure that we're most effective with the work that we can do, as well as making sure that we are building connections and reciprocity with the experts so that they don't feel overused, I guess. And we also have a few other collaborations that we use at the program. We often collaborate with academic institutions in order to get more capacity and resources. For example, we've done quite a few and are actually doing one right now, a practicum class at UCLA, where we get students engaged and help us do work on projects and programs that we think are important. And we also collaborate with a lot of other groups, for example, county and various non-governmental organizations like the California Native Plant Society. So now going into the work that we do more in detail. First, I'd like to start out with the Biodiversity Index, as I mentioned previously. This is kind of the guiding framework for the biodiversity program. It tracks all the different components of biodiversity and it contains 25 metrics across 3 themes. These 3 themes are native species protection and enhancement, social equity considerations, and then governance and management. And we originally developed this basing it off of the Singapore Index. At the time when we were creating the Biodiversity Index, which was in around 2018, 2019 or so, there hadn't really been any biodiversity indices that much out in the world. The main one was the Singapore Index. And we actually measured the Singapore Index for the city, but we realized that we had to change it and adjust it and to make it reflect LA's needs and priorities. For example, one of the metrics in the Singapore Index was the percentage of natural areas in the city. And based off of the scoring threshold in the Singapore Index, we actually scored maximum points because we have large intact areas in the Santa Monicas. For example, we have these large natural areas. So we scored the highest possible score on the index, which if you recall the maps that I showed earlier, that is not the case when the majority of our population does not have reasonable access to natural areas. So we adjusted scoring on metrics, changed the metrics as necessary to really make sure that it reflects Los Angeles and its biodiversity the best. And we do reports on this every 5 years. So we first published our first assessment of the Biodiversity Index in 2022. I have the cover on the left here. And this was when we fully comprehensively measured every single metric within the index and gave us an overall scoring that indicates where we're at for biodiversity. And we very recently published, and by recently, I mean this month, or no, last month, it's April now, got lots of time. But yeah, we very recently published it, and this is a follow-up report to the baseline report where we tracked progress and measured how things have changed since then. But diving into the outcomes of the baseline report, I took a screenshot of the report on the left, and I'd like to draw your attention down to the very bottom, if you can see it. It's 2022 assessment total, 37 out of 110 points. And that is a very low score and really calls to how much biodiversity needs to be improved within the city if it's that low. And with the threats of urbanization, it could potentially get worse. So really making sure that we are doing as much work we can right now is something that we value and want to work on. And diving in a little more to the index itself, we currently have 8 overall indicators for the index, just to give you a more in-detail look of how the index is structured. So we have habitat quality. So things I mentioned previously, like habitat quality in the city, natural areas, how those natural areas are connected to each other. We also have indicator species. So things like what species are found in these natural areas, what are species found in the urban areas, as well as species of conservation concern. And then we also have threats to biodiversity. So things like wildfire and the spread of invasive plants. We have access to biodiversity, which is kind of what I talked about earlier with environmental justice. We have education, community action, which we see a lot of in terms of things like community science, governance, so how we, the city, are doing when it comes to biodiversity, and then management. So how are we going about managing the existing natural resources that we have? And this segues nicely into the next major initiative that we're working on right now, which is our Local Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, or LBSAP. It's kind of a long name. We're probably going to change it by the time of its release, but that's the technical definition of what it is. So that's what we're calling it right now, an LBSAP. And there's been a lot of exciting thoughts and ideas on a biodiversity strategy and action plan on a global stage. But right now, there's no formal biodiversity action plan for the United States or for California. So it's really up to local governments, for example, the city of LA, to take the initiative and really begin to formulate these biodiversity plans to make measurable and achievable change and progress on biodiversity in the meantime. And in terms of the LBSAP, what we envision for it, it'll synergize with the Biodiversity Index. As I mentioned previously, the Biodiversity Index is the guiding framework, and it allows us to measure the key components of biodiversity that are essential for Los Angeles. So it will really allow us to say, okay, this indicator or metric is scoring low and it's not getting better. We need to guide and direct our actions towards improving the specific section. And it'll also allow us to measure the outcomes of the LBSAP and the actions and goals we include in it. We generally plan on making it go through 2030, and that coincides very nicely with a lot of things. For example, the state's 30 by 30 goals, but also it'll be the next time we measure the Biodiversity Index. So it will allow us to measure the outcomes of this plan and how impactful we were in implementing it. And this will be a citywide plan, not just an LASAN plan. So it'll include all departments within the biodiversity interdepartmental team. And as I mentioned previously, the interdepartmental team, they do reporting on goals every fiscal year. And we're going to look to expand upon that and have them look farther into the future, not just for the next fiscal year, but for the next 5 years, and to really strategize with help from things like the Expert Council on how they can be most effective with the work that they do. So some previous steps that we've taken for the LBSAP, we've created guidelines that outline the overall key important actions and goals that we want to prioritize in the plan. And we've also mapped departments and the work that they do to the Biodiversity Index. For example, going back to what I talked about previously with LA Public Library, they would do great for improving sections of community engagement and action, as well as education. So in terms of next steps, we want to revise the guidelines and really make sure that we have a concrete set of goals and actions that we will include in the plan and will allow us to really prioritize these in the future. And we'll continue to collaborate with the interdepartmental team as well as the Expert Council to make sure everybody's on board with the goals and actions we're saying we're going to do for the next 5 years, and then write the plan and publish it, which we're hoping to have done by the end of this year, although that is tentative. I am optimistic, but we will see. So, and now a project that I think will be very interesting, perhaps, to members of this meeting is the creation of localized plant palettes for landscaping in the city. As I mentioned previously, LA's significant environmental diversity results in similarly diverse plant communities. For example, the 16 ecotopes within the city, and even within those ecotopes, there are going to be different conditions. For example, one area might be shaded, another might be exposed, one might be on a hill, just as an example. And this results in highly local, super specific plant palettes for landscaping being needed, but is currently not perfect. The best resource we currently guide people to is CalScape, which is fantastic. And we've actually talked to people from CalScape before and seeing what they're envisioning for the tool. And doing some more highly local recommendations is something that we're working on. And this is still in its somewhat early stages. This is an ongoing collaboration with UCLA and the Senior Environmental Science Practicum. So they're the ones doing a lot of the science in terms of identifying, okay, these plants are most suitable for these areas across the city. And once we have those lists that they've developed, we'll do a lot of the coordination with stakeholders and experts, for example, like the California Native Plant Society and CalScape, various nurseries like Theodore Payne Foundation and more. I think native plant landscaping recommendations is such a huge issue, but is also frequently politicized. So making sure that everybody has buy-in and is in agreement and agrees on the direction that we're recommending native plant landscaping is something that we will work on in the future and are excited to work on when it comes to native plants. And now just a few other efforts. We do a lot of work with community science, namely the City Nature Challenge and the LA Bioblitz Challenge. If you are not familiar with community science, it's generally where we encourage community members to get outside and take observations on a community science app like iNaturalist. Next time you're outside, that could literally be in your neighborhood, taking a walk around the block, or going on a hike with the California Native Plant Society. I highly recommend for you to participate when you have the chance. It's super easy. You just download the iNaturalist app and you take clear pictures and upload it. It's super straightforward. And it's super valuable for us because it's such incredible data that we use constantly. And it really gets the community to be engaged and passionate about biodiversity while providing us and other researchers with valuable data as well. So next time you're outside, if you see, for example, a nice toyon, feel free to take an observation of that, or it could even just be weeds in the sidewalk. Any kind of data anywhere is so useful for us. So that's my little side pitch, but we work on that a lot. The City Nature Challenge is hosted by the Natural History Museum. They're a fantastic partner, and that's going to be the last weekend of April. So that's coming up soon. So I also encourage you to participate then if you'd like. And then our LA Bioblitz Challenge takes place in October and is the city's main challenge, and that's still a far way out. And then we also have educational initiatives, but the main one that we're working on right now is called Acuity, which stands for Empowering Changemakers Urban Biodiversity Initiative for Teachers and Youth. It's kind of a long name, but it's basically where we're promoting biodiversity education in middle schools. And then just moving forward, what we envision for the program, Biodiversity in the Future, we want to continue to build collaborations within the city with the expert council and beyond. As I mentioned previously, biodiversity is such a huge issue that we really need to come together in order to be able to address it. I think all of us can play a part in helping protect and enhance biodiversity, and we want to make sure that we're collaborating and doing the best possible job coordinating with others to help support that effort. We want to continue to showcase LA on a global stage as a biodiversity leader. The world actually looks to us, the city of LA, as a leader in biodiversity, just in terms of the program that we have and the work that we've been able to do. As I mentioned previously, biodiversity work in local government is still pretty new and exceptional. Another person from my team, my boss's boss, he went to the UN conference on biodiversity in Cali, Colombia, in October of last year, which was super insightful to see all of the other biodiversity work going on across the world. And so we want to continue to showcase LA as a leader in biodiversity and the work that we're able to do. We want to plan and implement projects to maintain and enhance the city's biodiversity and its native plants. We want to make sure that we're able to create on-the-ground change as much as possible. We'll continue to evaluate the LA Biodiversity Index and developing various new goals, projects to strategically increase our score. So that kind of falls into our local biodiversity strategy and action plan. We'll continue to protect biodiversity, including native plants, as an essential resource of the city. And then we also want to raise support and awareness for biodiversity within and outside the city. So it's always fantastic to be able to get the word out and talk to new people about the program and the work that we do. And that's it for me. I left my email on the slide here. If you have any inquiries, feel free to reach out at any time. And thank you.
Thank you, Lily. There were a couple of questions. One question regarded are the street trees included in those plant palettes?
Yeah, so it's specifically for the plant palettes, that's generally for landscaping. So it's not generally going to be street trees. However, we definitely are doing work on trying to figure out what trees are most appropriate for supporting biodiversity, and also considering the space requirements, things like that. So that's something that we're working on. However, when it comes to street tree planting, a lot of it is determined by grant requirements. So grants will have requirements of you can only plant these trees. So if we want to change street tree planting, that will have to also change the grant requirements. So it's a little more complicated than that, but it is something that the city is generally thinking about, I guess.
And Bill Neal said he was going to send you some reports that he has done on invasive plant removal throughout the city of LA. That was just a comment. Other than that, I didn't get a lot of, maybe another chat here. I didn't get any messages in the chat or questions in the chat. Does anybody have questions they want to ask Lily directly?
See a few more questions in the chat.
And some just popped in. Will the city work with neighborhood councils, green committees?
We're definitely looking to do more coordination with communities. Yeah, I mean, if you have recommendations for groups that we should work with, I'm welcome to hear them, so.
And can landscape transit corridors, metro freeways become part of the program's projects?
So that is something we're thinking of. However, a lot of it ultimately does come down to like who land that we're trying to improve. So when it comes to things like city-owned property, that's a lot easier for us to do work on. However, we're not opposed to doing work with other types of properties, for example, metro. However, that's just another layer of coordination that we'll have to take in consideration, just because we do have pretty limited resources, as I kind of hinted to previously. So making sure we're strategic with the resources we have is something that is important to us, and that might mean keeping it to city-owned properties in the meantime when it comes to specific implementation projects for right now.
Annetta is commenting that CFAC is already discussing street trees and is very slow on adding native trees to the approved list. And that's been my experience, that nobody really in the city is truly interested in getting native trees into the street tree scape. And I don't know who's in charge of that. you want to unchair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
So,
I think,
that's a comment, but it's a truly good one that there's no follow through.
yeah, I think I've talked, this is less in my shop and more in what other people in the city are doing the work. I think from what I've heard, I think a lot of people are wanting to plant native plants when possible. But the logistics of it can sometimes be difficult in terms of like space requirements, for example. So it is something that at least people I've talked to are interested in, but in terms of officially like trying to revise approved lists, that's something that's not in my control right now, unfortunately. So
Well, I can beat this to death because but I do want to comment that sometimes the city is such a huge bureaucracy that although your program sounds wonderful and it's got really great goals and doing wonderful studies and all those great maps, but other parts of the city aren't on board.
I,
And
yeah, yeah, I definitely feel that the city is such a huge thing, and you just got to do as much as we can, but yeah.
there's a question from Pat Bates. Will LASAN be working with groups on active projects? For example, Sepulveda Basin median, invasive eradication and expanding native vegetation.
I think when it comes to active projects, it can depend. Specifically within my program, we have very limited resources, so we need to be strategic with how we support other initiatives. So it depends, I guess. If you are interested, or if you do think there's any significant projects that you think we should be involved in, um, please feel free to send it my way and we can look into it.
Christian was asking, is LA County exploring a biodiversity program?
I don't know. I talk with the county occasionally, check in with them like once every few months at this point. I don't think they have anything concrete for the biodiversity program, but I also don't work for the county, so I'm not sure.
And apparently the LA Times reported that the government cutbacks will stop the planting of trees that were planned for it in neighborhoods needing shade. Is that part of your department?
So we do have a street tree planting program, and I don't directly work with them. However, I have seen them run into difficulties. So that would be more of a question for them. But I'm not fully sure with that regard since that's not the work that I do. So
And there's a comment, but it regards getting people to house by house to convert to native landscaping being a tough sell. And is that something the city, your department, sanitation, is interested in or working on?
I mean, yeah, I think that ties into generally our goals when it comes to community engagement and community education. So that's definitely an element of it, is trying to promote native plants and when it comes to things like private property. But I totally get it and empathize with it being challenging. So
I just, one thing comment on that is there's so much movement in the city to convert every inch of housing space to ADUs and fake lawns and concrete. And I don't know who in the city is going to kind of discourage those kind of actions. I mean,
Yeah,
the
it's
ADUs I know are that's a given, but there's apparently no requirement to tell people that fake lawns shouldn't be there, and to also require some kind of greenness, some real plant, converting, putting oxygen out into the landscape. What do we do about that?
Yeah, I mean, it is tricky because again, you mentioned that the city is such a huge entity with so many different moving parts that, you know, I can be an advocate and our program can provide recommendations for, hey, we should do this. But ultimate higher level decision makers have the say, unfortunately, when it comes to a lot of things like this.
Well, and then other people are pointing out that due to all the fires that have happened, and the insurance companies are going to really crack down and have people remove trees from their property to get insurance.
Yeah, it's an issue of I've been involved in a little bit of this, but I can say provide technical expertise and recommendations for what to do, but you know, still just like an environmental specialist and higher level decision makers will have that kind of say when it comes to things like rebuilding and permitting processes like that. So
And that does point out something that is an ongoing problem with converting any space, public or otherwise, to native landscaping, and that is follow-up maintenance of the native plants and also follow-up removal of invasive plants. It, education of the landscapers, the people who are actually doing the maintenance, so that they know about native plants just doesn't happen, it seems like.
yeah, no, we see the same things. And when it comes to things like grant applications, we're absolutely considering continued stewardship of the areas as a cost in that design. And that's something that we've seen again a lot with projects of, hey, we've installed these native plants, but they haven't been maintained. So
And Jana did point out that LA County has significant ecological area program, and she put up the link. And I wanted to, before I forgot, and of course I don't have the dates in my head right now, but towards the end of this month, April, that City Nature Challenge is going to be happening. So if you're at all interested in participating in that, um, this is your chance this year. Sometime in April. I think it's towards the end, like in the 20s, 27 or something like that, 25th through the 27th. Um,
let me pull up a link to the website and I
yeah,
can,
I just, where did oh, I just saw that on Facebook. There was a post on, I think Theater Pain Foundation put a post on Facebook. Yeah, there it is. So, and that's a big deal every year, and I think it's growing and growing. And it's not, of course, just LA, it's all over.
all over. And fun fact, the City Nature Challenge corresponds with the highest amount of observations INAP that we see. So it's pretty successful, which is great to see.
Are there any other questions or comments? did I miss anything that I didn't cover? Okay, well, Lily, I really, this is very educational about what um LA sanitation is doing. I would never, I subscribe to your emails, so I get them. And I'm also see the stuff on um, your Facebook pages. So I do see what is going on there, and it's kind of surprising because you don't think about sanitation, the sanitation department being involved in biodiversity and ecological issues. So it's been quite an education, and I loved your maps. Those maps,
Thank
I don't
you.
know who does those maps or,
That was me.
oh my God, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That, no wonder you love maps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love maps too. I love to see, it kind of gives you this broad picture. Oh, this is what's happening here. And thanks for that work. Um, any other questions? Any comments? And getting a lot of thank yous. And again, we are recording this, and sometime in the near future, this will be posted to our webpage. Again, Lily, thank you so much, and I wish you great success in your career at LASAN.
Thank you very much. It was great speaking to everybody here.
All right, good night, guys.
Good night.
Oops, gotta push the buttons.